Yeah, Quinn was like crouching earlier because I'm tall, but not as tall as Quinn. So, okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. If you are looking for the What About a Lawsuit panel, you're in the right room. Yay. Okay. So today's conversation. So the intention of today's panel is not to be giving legal advice, nor should any information shared be interpreted as legal advice. So the thing we are attempting to do today is really chart a path that leads to mass resistance against police brutality, and how the law can both be a tool and also how it can hold the movement back. So the thing that we're looking at when we're talking about police brutality within the systems that it currently exists in is that this is a cancer. This is a growing cancer that has molded its way into how we believe the movement forward should look like. So this is kind of like an attempt to perform a very messy surgery to really pull apart the ways that we can use the tools of the system against itself, and also what it looks like to actually build a mass movement. So that's going to be today's panel. So I did want to go over the bios for our lovely panelists. We do have Melissa Delgado here. I was like, I'm not going in order, but
everybody calls me Mel though.
Mel is an attorney who specializes in criminal defense and police misconduct. Mel is admitted to practice in the state of Illinois and Massachusetts. Mel has dedicated her career to ensuring equal treatment within the justice system by safeguarding liberty, interests, and upholding the rights of individuals. During her education at Loyola University Chicago School of Law, Mel worked in the Life After Innocence program, where she helped exonerated individuals navigate the legal landscape after being wrongfully convicted. Mel worked as a public defender for the city of Boston, where she represented individuals across 3 district courts, including being instrumental in the development of the city's mental health courts, recovery after justice, and bridges. Feeling led back to Chicago, Mel brought her passion and fortitude to the Cook County Public Defender's Office, where she currently works, serving in 4 major divisions over the last 10 years. Currently, Mel is assigned to the Special Litigation Unit within the Legal Resources Division, which focuses on tracking police misconduct, due process violations, and discovery sanctions. Mel has prided herself on the struggles she has overcome personally, the people she has been able to help through various programs, clinics, and her job, as well as helping mentor other young attorneys and interns advocate for justice and change. So let's get a round of applause for Melissa. We also have Yvonne De La Torre, who is a founding member of Families Demanding Justice and has been in the struggle to stop police brutality since the police killing of her lifelong partner, Alejandro Campos Rios. Yvonne has been a prominent voice in Southern California to unite families to fight against police terror and help them get organized through her own personal experience of having to navigate the system that has only led to dead ends. She now spends her time fighting against injustice by responding to local police killings, showing support for other impacted families, and protesting other injustices, including the mass deportation machine. She carries her love for Alejandro everywhere she goes and is determined to build a mass movement that can confront the system that protects killer cops and will stop at nothing until families get justice for their loved ones. Yeah, thank you. And then at the end, we also have Emily Halter. Emily is a criminal defense attorney currently assigned to the Felony Trial Division of the Law Office of the Cook County Public Defender. While in law school at Northwestern School of Law, Emily worked with the Center on Wrongful Convictions Clinic, where she realized her passion for criminal law and working closely with clients. After graduating from law school in 2018, Emily spent nearly 2 years working at a large corporate law firm in Chicago. Missing criminal law, Emily quickly left to begin her career as a public defender. Emily has worked as a public defender for the last 6 years, representing clients on a variety of criminal charges. Emily is truly passionate about fighting for her clients and their families. Now, let's hear All right, so to give some framing to today's discussion, I do have a presentation that I put together. So this presentation is going to consist of the different ways that the law has held the movement back in order for us to really be critical of the system that enables police brutality. So just to be clear, when we're talking about today's topic, there is nothing wrong with families and victims who choose to pursue lawsuits or even choose to take settlements. But today's discussion is to be clear that lawsuits do not fundamentally change the system or put an end to police brutality. So the question that we're asking today, the difficult question that we're asking today, is are lawsuits and settlements the best we can do? So while people are being beaten by police and killed in record numbers, while families lose loved ones every day across this country, is the best we can hope for that some people get a little money out of it and then the system goes unscathed? So part of what we're bringing to this conference is talking about what we need today in the movement to stop police brutality. So what we need today is a nationwide movement in the streets that demands nothing less than getting killer cops jailed. So to get to that goal, we have to be real about this insistence that lawsuits be settled by grifter lawyers, and that lawsuits are, insistence that lawsuits be settled by grifter lawyers. Also this insistence of only using lawsuits as a form of justice and pursuing dead-end reforms which strategically have a demobilizing effect on building the kind of movement we need. So the question also is, what are we really up against? Why is it so important that we're having this very difficult conversation today? Because in 2024, out of the 1,365 people killed by police, only 9 officers, that's 9 officers, were charged with any crime which is less than 1%. And an even smaller number were found guilty of that crime. So this is what we're up against, and this is why we're having these very difficult conversations during today's discussion and also throughout the conference. So while lawsuits have become almost second nature to those affected by police brutality, they have increasingly become more of a tool for the system against the people than the other way around. So having these issues being turned into settlements by specifically parasitic lawyers and quickly becoming a way for the status quo to continue unabated, with killer cops still remaining on payrolls, grifter lawyers still cashing in their checks, and local governments facing no accountability. So lawsuits then become a way to maintain the status quo rather than deter it or challenge it. So again, what we're hoping to get from this panel is dispelling the idea that lawsuits are the only way to seek justice, hearing from impacted families and the grifter lawyers that they've had to work with, and also what is a real movement lawyer and how can they help build the movement using the tools that the system has to offer. So we're going to go ahead and break down some of these ideas that revolve around lawsuits. So the first one being settlement. So let's talk about it, right? So let's talk about settlements. So the question that we're asking is, again, not whether or not families and people impacted by police brutality should accept settlements, but how do settlements help the system avoid accountability? So settlements ask the big question: how much can the government pay for their police officer to get away with murder. So cities, counties, and local governments across the U.S. are paying out more and more in settlements to the families and victims of police brutality, rather than attempting to put an end to it by prosecuting and punishing cops who will then kill and brutalize. Because maybe they would think twice about killing someone if there were consequences for their actions. So the city will simply allocate more money to settle lawsuits in court, boiling down police brutality as just another expense in the cost of doing business. So essentially just another cog in the machine. So in the city of Chicago, right? So they have an allocated amount for paying out to victims of police brutality. So within the first 5 months in 2025, they already exceeded that amount. So does anybody want to guess what they think the amount was budgeted for? Anyone want to guess?
80 million.
What was it? 8.8 million?
No.
Is that the guess?
80 million.
80 million. Okay, so pretty good answer. So it was 82 million that was budgeted. So by May, they exceeded 162 million just in settlements being paid out. So the truth is, when local governments don't believe they can win in civil court due to these egregious nature of the crimes their police committed, settling allows them to escape any legal responsibility for the actions of their police. Also, when a city reaches their settlement, the public usually understands this as meaning that the instance of police brutality is more or less settled and is no longer an issue, which we know is not accurate. Also, non-disclosure agreements are put forward and have been a practice in many settlements agreements with impacted families, turning families into legal targets if they speak out about the details of the case. So in conclusion, lawsuits are often pushed on families and victims by grifter lawyers as the only practical solution to pursue. So to push families only towards lawsuits, lawyers minimize the effectiveness of movements in the streets while sadly hoping to flip that civil lawsuit into a settlement. So again, this was that statistic I forgot to put up on the screen. 82 million budgeted, 162 was actually reached in settlements, only by May. So for local governments, my presentation. Okay. So now let's talk about parasitic lawyers. My presentation got out of order. Anyway, parasitic lawyers. Let's talk about parasitic lawyers. We're talking about them because we need to be real about the people who may be bad actors. This is a reality that many families have to face. So how many people have heard someone say, this is just the way things go?
Yeah.
Right? So like how many people have heard that from lawyers? Right? From lawyers saying this is just how things go and we're supposed to accept this? What do we say to that?
Fuck that.
Hell no, we do not accept this. So oftentimes families and victims that are filled with rage against the system and the police, so this rage is already there. They're often ready to do anything to get justice, but are quickly approached by grifter lawyers who usher them into fighting the right way through proper channels. So when a family is in the streets and they're demanding that these killer cops get jailed, a grifter lawyer will then step in, shut them up by saying that speaking will hurt their case, then start to demand things like better training for police or other dead-end reforms in front of the news cameras, essentially speaking for those families. So let's look at this under the reality of capitalism, right? So from a business standpoint, these lawyers would rather families take settlements so that they can avoid putting in work to litigate and fight to hold the city, state, or local government accountable. So these lawyers will typically take cases, they know that they can push to settle and string families along for years, telling them that they will fight for their loved ones in civil court, all while pushing for a settlement behind closed doors. So for many of these grifter lawyers, when the case is not neatly packaged, one example, we know about Ben Crump, right? So if someone has a gun on them or they were killed by police, they're quickly going to drop that family's case, leaving them devastated and believing they have no hope for getting justice. The Crumpdom, right? So grifter lawyers need the system to stay intact, to keep the money flowing in, and thus have a financial stake in having killer cops on the street. All right, so next, the third point is the last one, and then we'll go to the panel, but let's talk about reforms. So reforms rarely ever change the reality on the ground for people under the gun of police brutality, but often serves as a wider purpose for the illusion of change. So we have this cycle of reforms, right? So we start off with the police having killed someone. And then we see public outrage. After this public outrage happens, we have the lawyers, politicians, grifter lawyers step in and make these false promises of reforms through the proper channels. And what usually happens? Usually leads to no justice reached. Because for families who have had their loved ones killed by the police, the call for justice is getting these killer cops jailed. And then we return to the top of the cycle with the police killing someone. And then the cycle continues. So one example of these reforms, we can take a look at, for example, body cameras, right? So for many police departments, helping to expose these police killings and the severity of police brutality, this happens at a nationwide level because we do have these body cameras, right? But this is an example of a reform. Though this data and information is helpful for us, we need to understand that we need to be using this as a tool to really go for the actual calls for justice. We can also take a look at consent decrees. Oops, just kidding, sorry. I'm gonna put that back up. All right, so looking at consent decrees, so that are put upon local police departments, essentially meaning local police departments are monitored by the feds or another oversight board to institute certain practices and policies. So for the first example, we're going to take a look at the Los Angeles Police Department, which was exposed for widespread corruption and brutality in the ramparts of scandal. The department was then placed under a consent decree by the Department of Justice from 2001 to 2006 to monitor reforms in the department. My notes got cut off. I'm sorry, everyone. So, can we guess, was their police department reformed? It was not. I think the number was from 2000. They went on to commit over 8,000 examples of police brutality within LAPD from that time period. Second example is from Chicago, here in Chicago. So in the wake of the killing of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, civil suits resulted in a 2019 consent decree requiring reforms to training, use of force, accountability systems, and community engagement that is still in place. However, the result was, since 2019, CPD has been involved in at least 40 fatal shootings, while continuing to rack up hundreds of millions in police misconduct lawsuits for things like assault and torture. So we have to be real about this cycle of reforms in order to be real about what the fight is going to take to confront the system that continues to kill people in the streets. That's what we're discussing today. So while these reforms often are led by opportunist activists or nonprofits, and sometimes by very sincere people and impacted families who are looking to, seek change, to change the system. These reforms serve as a distraction for people to pursue, leading people to rely on the proper channels who would otherwise be in the streets demanding justice or bringing forward masses of people to demand something different. So, pursuing a civil lawsuit can take years to get started. Also, finding a lawyer who is willing to put your loved one at the center and at the focus of how you want to see justice is also its own journey. And dragging families and victims to court for years, all of these calls for justice fade from the public's and people's collective memory, and more importantly, the killer cops remain free. And we say, fuck that. Fuck that! So, on our panel today, we're going to talk about what that hope looks like, what it's going to take to make sure that we're able to advance the movement to stop police brutality by listening to impacted families, relying on the science and the data to expose what these police are doing within our communities and to our people. And also what it means to be a movement lawyer who centers families in their fight for justice and make sure that the system make sure that we're able to use the tools within the system to fight for that justice and make sure that we are moving towards that path to stop police brutality. All right, so we're now going to move it over to the panel. Let me just get my notes together. Okay, so we're going to hear first from Yvonne De La Torre. Could you please share about your experience in your fight for justice for Alejandro and your personal experience with the lawyers you had to work with? And I'm going to pass you the.
When Alejandro was killed in 2024, I knew he was killed. So the only way, of course, you have to seek a lawyer to press charges. So I hired a wrongful death lawyer with no experience whatsoever in police brutality. So he decided to hire another lawyer that had 33 years of experience in police brutality, and it ended up being dead end. Because ultimately, since I wasn't the next of kin, my son was the next of kin, so they pretty much, I was the one that started everything. I was the one that sent them the photos of all the protests and everything I was doing to show that I mean business here. And towards the end, so because my son was locked up, they found out he was locked up, so they went behind my back and coerced him to settle. But what was the meaning of hiring this attorney that had 33 years experience in police brutality to go after these cops? We sent him out, we sent Alejandro out to Kansas City to do an outside autopsy. That pathologist found out he was murdered. Even showed on the thing that it was a homicide. He had 2 live round bullet wounds in his body when they said it was a projectile that killed him. A non-lethal projectile that pierced his chest and killed him. And when I seen all that, I said, no, they killed him. If you look at the footage, the body cam footage that was out there that day, you can see him showing that they shot him in the forearm and goes down and calls them putos. Well, that's where the bullet wound was, on the forearm. And you want to sit there and tell me. So that's why I went after the lawyers, to go after I wanted somebody to pay for this. So they seeked out and went behind my back because I wasn't the next of kin. I wasn't married to him, but we were together for 28 years. We had a son together. And so they chose to go around what I was doing to go after the next of kin, which is my son, which is his father that was killed. And then they had to go to call, also, they informed him that his dad was killed while he was locked up in county jail. So ever since then, he's just been in and out of jail. Right now, he's locked up. They try to get him for 18 months. Right now, he's only doing 9 months. But still, they don't realize the agony that it still lives along with the families after the death of their loved one. And
Explain like what happened at the beginning, middle, and end of like how to work it.
so in the beginning, I kind of got a good enough of them. I had no money. I had nothing, no, Alejandro didn't have no life insurance, no nothing, so I kind of, the lawyers paid for it. They paid for his services and everything. I cremated him. So I kind of got that out of them. So at that moment, I was able to have his services and everything else and give him a little somewhat a service because I couldn't afford it. And the sad part is too, I asked his family, his parents, to help me to get medical attention for him, but they refused. Oh, but they sure love to take that money. The dad was so greedy about it. When I told him, I said he had mental illness issues. He's like, no, he doesn't. Why? Because he's Mexican? Then a Mexican man can't have mental health issues? And because your family is an alcoholic family, that your son became an alcoholic, and because he couldn't deal with it, you know, it just pisses me off because the whole entail, I was fighting for justice. They were seeking money. His dad was seeking money on his dead son. And that just pissed me off. It's like, that wasn't the reason why I started this lawsuit. The lawsuit was I wanted to make these officers pay because they did kill him. And the pathology even put on there, on his death certificate, it was a homicide. But because they went on the counties, because these county pathologists have these officers in there while they're doing the autopsy or doing what they're doing. And they said, oh, they write it down like, that this is how he died, but really not how he really died. Everything is all lies. Everything is all lies and cover up. And I wanted all that to come out. But these lawyers don't do it. That's the problem. They're scared to go against what they need to go against. And also, you know, these DAs protect these officers just as well. So they know they can't, they feel they can't win, they settle. And these cops keep getting away with it because nobody wants to fight against the system. Because the system is the one that causes this in the first place. The system causes our loved ones to be murdered. Because nobody wants to be held accountable at all. And these cops know that they're not to be held accountable for these killings that they kill against the brown and the black. Because they're gang members, they're homeless, this, that. No, it doesn't matter what they are. They're human beings, they do have a family, but they're going through stuff in their mind, in their life at that moment. That's the reason why they're out on the street at that moment, or whatever they're doing. But nobody deserves a death sentence. And that's what I was fighting for. And these lawyers, they just say, oh yeah, I'll fight for justice. No, they don't. None of them fight for justice. None of them. And because these cops know that they have these qualified immunities and everything else that they have to protect them, but they need to go after their pensions, go after their money. Why do the taxpayers have to pay for our loved ones that were killed by them? If they start going after these cops' pensions, they would stop. They would think before they start shooting. Oh, I'm not giving, if I shoot somebody, I kill somebody, oh, they're gonna take my money. They're gonna take my money. Then what my family gonna live off when if something happens to me? That way they think before they shoot. Like I said, nobody deserves to die no matter what. No matter what crime or what they were doing at the moment, nobody deserves to die. Nobody. I don't care if they're wrong. They don't deserve to die at all. And then everything is always stereotyped. Everything is stereotyped in this world. Oh, because he's a gang member. Oh, because he's this. Oh, he's that. It doesn't matter. We're all human beings. And we all were born to live. If we're gonna die, we die normally. The way we're supposed to die. Not by being killed. By the police that's supposed to protect and serve us. They only protect and serve property, that's all they do. They don't protect nothing else. Without Alejandro's case, because he was in front of McDonald's. They were worried about their co-workers, they were worried about opening up the McDonald's. Everything else is just like, you only weigh 150 pounds. These officers are more than 300 pounds. They could just have tackled him easily. Didn't have a gun, didn't have a knife, didn't have nothing. A belt. Who didn't get hit with a belt when they were young? I know I did. I got swatted with a paddle. But I'm still here. So I'm pretty sure these officers did too. They just don't have discipline. They don't have discipline. And supposedly these reforms are supposed to be discipline them. It doesn't work. When they fly their protective orders.
What was the difference between how your lawyers worked with you and another impacted family that happened after your case?
So after my case, I referred them another family. Let them know that this person was killed by this police department. The police department that Alejandro was killed, they killed another one. Then after that, they killed another one. So I let them know that this, then come to find out that my lawyer actually represented another family. We went out to their press conference and everything, and they shut that family down. They said, don't speak, don't say anything. I'm like, you tell them to be quiet, but then me, you were like praising me, like, you know, I sent you photos of all the protests I was doing, and he even came out to our first 022 in Los Angeles and took a video of me saying my speech. And then, but then you tell this other family that they couldn't do it, that they have to be quiet because it would hurt their case. But they come to find out, it's just, they want to protect their 40%. They want that money. They want their money, but they don't do nothing for us. Nothing at all. Nothing at all. And then after that, another killing. So within a 13-month span, they killed 3 Latino men in our city. And now the DA just recently said that, oh, everything was justified. It was Alejandro's fault, like why he got killed. These officers were scared for their life. Scared of a belt? How do you be scared of a belt?
Same way you're scared of a man running away from you.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's like, even if they had a gun or knife, they don't deserve to die. There others, I know when I was younger, they always say, shoot them in the leg so they don't run. Now they're just shooting to kill. They're not shooting to jail them or anything, you know. Now they're just shooting to kill us. It's always the black and the brown that the ones that always in this situation. You don't see white people. You don't see the whites killing the white.
They do, we don't see it, unfortunately. It's because we've been, systematically desensitized.
You always see the brown and the black is always criminals. That we're always the criminals because gangs and everything else. And it's like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And it seems nothing has changed ever since with Rodney King. They have video. They had videos showing them beating him up, and they still got away with it. They still got away with it. And it was wrong. You can see clearly it was wrong. He was being beaten. And they still got away with it. So it's like nothing has changed since anything. So it takes us to change it because obviously the lawyers are not changing anything. I just want a lawyer that's willing to, like a bulldog, to go after these cops, to prosecute them. Because obviously in California they ain't doing it. That's why they tell the moms to go do reforms, bills, other Marines because they don't want to prosecute these cops. These DAs don't want to prosecute these cops whatsoever at all. They take that blue oath seriously. And it's a shame. It's a shame that our loved ones go, they kill our loved ones and our loved ones are the bad people.
Thank you, Rigo. I would like to now invite Mel. You're very passionate about the data and the way that we can expose the police. So if you can explain a little bit about like your current projects in documenting the police.
Thank you, Araceli. I think there was another subject you wanted me to talk about. I think I'm going to address that first, if that's okay with you. I think that's about how you find parasitic attorneys and how do you weed them out. If you're in the situation where you're at the worst point in your life, somebody you deeply cared about has just been murdered or brutalized by the police, how do you ascertain if this is a parasitic attorney? All of us know who Ben Crump is, but he's not the limit out there. How do you decipher who's a Ben Crump civil rights attorney opposed to, say, a Deja Bisney who's in Milwaukee, who has a client-forward kind of mentality? Well, unfortunately, it's going to take some work. Even though you're in your deepest despair, where you've lost somebody you love so much, to avoid a Ben Crump or a parasitic attorney, you need to start looking at some things because it's going to impact how it goes forward. Thank you. I'm naturally very loud, so I wasn't sure if I actually need this. Can everybody hear me even before that? Yeah. Never had a court reporter ever ask me to speak up. Doesn't happen. So when you go meet with a civil rights attorney, you're going to want to see if they're client-centered. You're going to want to talk to them about what are your top 3 must-haves when working with them. Now, I know a lot of people that their first thing is going to be, I want that police officer prosecuted. And that is very understandable. But it's going to be a red flag for you if that civil rights attorney says, oh, I can get him prosecuted. Because the fact of the matter is, no civil rights attorney has the power to get somebody prosecuted. That is within the hands of the prosecutor. However, that civil rights attorney could tell you what their game plan is to try to get towards that goal that you have. Some of the things that they can do is work with the media in certain ways to try to put pressure on the prosecutor for that district, for that county, depending on what state you are, whether they're a state's attorney, because in Illinois they call it state's attorneys, in Massachusetts they call it district attorneys. They're all elected officials, and they're beholden to the communities that they prosecute for. So you can talk to them about what their game plan is for putting pressure on it. If you are from some smaller community where it is not the most liberal community, like the areas that I've practiced in both Boston and in Chicago and Cook County, you're gonna wanna know if that civil rights attorney has ever worked with smaller counties that are less liberal and what their media approach has been to with that, because the fact is, if they're trying to get the message out to that community, put the pressure on that prosecutor because of their elected officials, you might not want them to be doing this global mass media blitz, which also can be another red flag if this civil rights attorney is wanting to go on CNN and all the big ones just to get their name out to the giant community of the United States. They might not have a game plan for the media. If you are in a small conservative area, they should want to go to the media for the conservative side, to play up the piece for the conservative side, like they would to a jury, to know who is the ones that can actually put pressure on that prosecutor. So these are just two red flags that I specifically wanted to point out. You want to also talk to them about what your other goals are outside of prosecution. Because as Araceli pointed out in her slides, that officers are often not prosecuted, and it's fine to have that as your top priority, but sometimes you have to have these other things, and unfortunately, those might not be your top goal, but it might be something else that you could ask that might be achievable when a prosecution is achievable. Getting the officer decertified. They are required to be certified in their states to hold that badge and a gun. If they're decertified, they should not be able to have a badge or a gun anywhere in the United States. But we'll get to how they wander around and when I get to the other question, because they do love to wander, which helps them disguise themselves in a new place. You might want to have them fired from that department. I prefer to be certified so they can never have a badge and a gun, but that might be another area. And although we have discussed reforms, how it can be a cycle of just nothing happening with them, it could be your least of your concerns, but still on your top concerns list.
I'm gonna have to step in here. So the thing that we're talking about here today is what it's going to take to actually confront these systems, not doing the same play that has given us some crumbs, some things that kind of like make us feel better in the moment, but how do we fight to stop police brutality, and more than that, stop this from happening to anyone else in the future?
And I'm getting to that because of what some of these reforms can be that haven't been done. It goes back to the wandering police officers. So
we're talking about this like as a nationwide pandemic that is killing people across this country. So trying to address these issues that we're facing in the streets at this like individual level doesn't quite address this systemic problem that is resulting in the cops essentially going free in every city across this country.
And I understand that, but there are lower level things that happen. Any cop that's killed somebody, there's a history behind that. And that's why I'm trying to talk about a specific reform that is hopefully a way to try to get them off the streets before it results in murder. That is a reform that has not been done in this country. There is no national database tracking these cops who start off doing things small, which when they get away with that, when they get away with something else, then they get away with something else, and then they eventually murder someone. Because there's no national database tracking them, the federal government actually did away with their remedial database that wasn't even a good database because it wasn't even tracking off-duty misconduct like domestic battery, which a lot of police officers at home commit domestic battery. If we're not tracking that, and not seeing what they're doing to even their spouse that they're supposed to love, what are they gonna do to a stranger on the streets? And because that reform has never been taken seriously, we are not finding these officers when they're beating somebody on the street to try to get a confession out of them. Or they're planting drugs on them or a gun and getting away with that. They just keep escalating into what we've seen in Baltimore with these tough rides that killed Freddie Gray, where we see what they've done with planting stuff in Baltimore and that guns that they were caught with body cams. It's the way to actually address trying to get the bad cops before they kill people is by tracking them, and it's not done on a large scale level. Which will turn to the first question that Araceli asked me, why I want to go with the other one first, is because I wanted to segue from what can be done by civil rights attorneys to what I'm currently working on with Emily and I's office is tracking bad cops so that we have a database in our office to try to identify them, because if we can start showing the courts on criminal cases where our clients are actually the defendants and are the victims of certain societal things, the society still looks at them differently than as Yvonne's spouse, who was a victim of a murder. Sometimes we're actually representing people that are charged with murder. But one of the ways for society to start seeing these bad cops and getting them off the street is if they can't testify on me and Emily's cases, they're not going to have jobs anymore. So I have initiated in my office tracking police misconduct throughout all of Cook County, which is hundreds of police officers, so that we can try to stop them from being able to testify in court. We can start to make sure that that information doesn't go by the wayside, because luckily enough in Illinois, they can't destroy those police misconduct records. I recently talked about Rampart in LA. In LA, they just started having fire sales on like burning. There was actually policies within police departments around LA of burning those misconduct records so that they couldn't be tracked, so that people couldn't actually backtrack and find these police officers to be able to use the information against them, so that people could start seeing those patterns and start being able to give that information to civil rights attorneys. Civil rights attorneys, when doing these cases, sometimes don't know about all the bad stuff up there because there is no mass tracking of these officers, and because sometimes police departments, along with the FOP, are trying to protect them. So I believe that data and tracking these officers, I don't mean putting like tracking devices on them, but seeing what they did previously will help us try to curb and get rid of these officers before they commit the ultimate harm to citizens in the United States. So I would suggest that if you are from another state, look into that information, try to be advocates for why there should be open records requests. In Illinois, it's called FOIA. It might just be called open records requests. If you're in a state where they don't have good ones, I would suggest that you start advocating for there being open records requests and getting that information on these police officers, and starting to try to do a grassroots thing of tracking them. Because if they've done it once, I can guarantee they've done it twice, I can guarantee they've done it 3 times. They have a history. They're somewhere with the paper, and if they've killed somebody and you have a civil rights attorney, make sure that civil rights attorney is getting all of that paper and finding out their past stuff and investigating and going and talking to people who also have been harmed by that officer, because of the fact there's always a history, and the one way to be able to get rid of them is by showing a huge pattern of horrible behavior and why they are not fit to be paid by our taxpayer salaries to have a badge and a gun. Sorry for getting a little angry and passionate.
Thank you for that. Emily, I know you work in the public instances, and I just kind of wanted to ask, in your experience, kind of more than a settlement, what are ways that lawyers can help build the movement, and anything that you can like start speaking to that?
Yeah, so I don't do police brutality work, but working with police brutality or like working with people who have experienced and been victims of police brutality goes hand in hand with being a public defender. Basically, all day, every day, Chicago police officers are roughing people up, and they are not like doing horrible stuff all day, every day. And even if it's not causing massive injuries or death, which often it is, it's still treating people in ways that someone whose job is to protect and serve should absolutely never treat anyone ever. So, yeah, I mean, I think a big thing that a lawyer can do, honestly, and this isn't even maybe necessarily legal, is just acknowledging what someone has experienced and be there for them on a human level, and keep that in mind as you go through the criminal case. And I think in general, a lot of lawyers forget that just like interacting with police or the criminal justice system is like the worst experience someone can ever have. And if you don't acknowledge that first and get to know like the human, their family, the like trauma that they're going through, how hard every single day is, like it makes it really hard to support people in any other way, because so much of the experience is wrapped up in what people are feeling emotionally and struggling with emotionally. So just lawyers in general should be better about doing whatever we can to support people, not only legally, but emotionally first. And I think that that's really important. Also, as lawyers, we have, I don't know, speaking privilege that other people don't have. Like, people have to listen to us sometimes, not all the time. And I think it's important to, as lawyers, do what we can to call attention to every little thing. But I do think to help build the movement, a big thing lawyers can do is just support and listening to clients and putting the clients first and putting your wishes before other things. And that doesn't mean that they're always going to be something that can be accomplished. But if you're leading with like a people first mindset, you can help find other solutions or problem solve, or just like be there when you have to deliver bad news. Like what happened with the lawyers about telling your son about your partner's murder, that should never happen. Like that's something that should be discussed with you. Like that's a personal thing that if lawyers led with a more client first or like person first approach.
No,
That's my answer.
Thank you. Let me see, what are examples of some of these lawyers that you've seen act egregiously towards families?
I think people being dismissive of emotions and frustration is probably just the most egregious thing that I see, like leading with a pay me, or like, I don't have time for that, that's just not the way things are, and being super dismissive and not taking the time to just acknowledge that shit's really unfair and really hard to deal with. Like, whenever you're interacting with someone in this space, you have to see them and like not be dismissive and not just like perpetuate the trauma. And I think lawyers do that a lot. Like, lawyers can be really, really bad. And yeah, that doesn't make it any better.
Thank you. I wanted to, let me see what we're at in time. Okay, I wanted to like open it up to like any questions you might have from like the audience.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say if you guys can talk more towards, when you do the civil cases, there's different type of compensatory things that you can ask for. One of the things that you can ask for is punitive damages, which is basically going after the attorney I'm sorry, going after the police officer, because they're insured, you know, police officers are insured. So they'll have whatever the insurance is, yeah, they are.
Not individually.
No, as the department
Department, yeah.
itself, they're insured. So the insurance usually is the one that pays off whatever lawsuit it is. If it goes after that, it comes out of their actually operating budget. But if you actually go towards punitive damages, that actually can have some type of results because it's actually hitting the pockets of the police officers. And that can deter other officers from killing if we're going after their house. You see what I'm saying? Can you talk towards that?
So unfortunately, because of the huge unions for the police, there's a lot of pushback about doing that. Plus, because of case law, meaning like the law that's come out from courts because of qualified immunity, that it's very rare that you can actually go after an officer's pocket. I would like to see that officers should be required to have individual insurance, the way that myself and Emily, both as attorneys, you're required to carry liability insurance. And so are doctors. I believe even massage therapists, I believe, are, and police officers. Not to begrudge massage therapists, they're great. But like they're required, even though that's not like a doctorate level education, they're required to do that. And these are things that aren't life or death, at least not with doctors and attorneys. We're not life or death, at least not in states that don't have the death penalty. That why police officers aren't required to have individual insurance, because what would happen is if they keep having issues, they'd be sued, and then a carrier would drop them, and then they can't be employed. I think that would be the route around qualified immunity, because qualified immunity law is so horrible for plaintiffs' side because of the fact that the courts have always given every out for prosecutors and cops that's ever been imagined that they could.
I guess my question is, once you surpass qualified immunity, once the officers are denied qualified immunity, if they're denied the motion for summary judgment, and you go to trial, you're at trial already for the civil case, you can ask for punitive damages against the attorneys as part of the compensation package.
You mean the officer?
I'm sorry. It's yours.
I'm like, I know we're really bad, but we're not cops. People, I swear we're not undercover cops.
That's just what I found particularly helpful for us, is because we don't want the taxpayer paying, we don't want the insurance paying, we want the officer to feel the pain of it.
Right.
So once the officers, it's not like you win qualified immunity, they lose qualified immunity. They lose the motion for summary judgment. So once that happens and you're actually at trial, one of the compensatory things you can ask for is punitive damages against the officers. Correct?
Yeah, yes, it is. However, they're little sneaky little SOBs. If you haven't been able to see, sometimes when that happens, those officers, like if you say in the house, they immediately start divorce proceedings and put the house in their wife's name. That's what you saw with Derek Chauvin in Minnesota. All of a sudden, as soon as that case was coming, his wife divorced him. I don't know what the background is. We don't. Maybe she, for all I know, she could have been a victim of his and was just waiting for an out. But if you look at a lot of these cases, you'll just see that they magically start getting divorces and putting assets in other people's names. I don't know how to stop them from doing that, but it's a very, very good point to point out. Yes, it's great when you can actually go after them and hit them in the bank, where it might actually hurt them financially in a way to like feel like you're not going after the community's money and that you're going after the person that did it wrong. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I actually will add that to my notes for ever talking about this in the future, because that one just kind of slipped right over my head before that. Thank you.
Do you have other questions?
Okay, I don't necessarily have a question, but I guess I kind of just wanted to like make some of like just like reflecting off of what's been said about like qualified immunity, what's been said about even what he's proposed about kind of tracking these officers wherever they're going. I think a couple of things come up for me like in listening to that. I think with the qualified immunity aspect of things, like, you know, what we've been consistently speaking about for like the last couple of minutes has been civil suit basically against these officers. Like, this isn't a kind of criminal accountability that would actually see them off the streets and locked up, where they for sure will not be able to kill or anything. Honestly, Derek Chauvin, I mean, literally someone was like basically took his life and was behind bars. down the street, right? We kind of talk about going after, their pockets and their checks, but even as what you described, there's all of these different avenues in which the system is basically saying, like, that's not gonna happen, but I want us to reflect on the fact that we've been spending the last couple of minutes talking about this civil suit aspect, when principally, the getting them off the streets and having them locked up is how we actually prevent them from killing anybody else, how we prevent them from turning into another case where someone else has to contend with, like, what this means. So I wanted to kind of lay that forward. And I think the second thing with what you mentioned about the, kind of tracking where these officers or, different places that they're going from, I think the question that arises there is just like, okay, like, well, what is then done to, again, get them off the street? So we could be tracking, we could be acknowledging the fact that they're going from place to place, but the principal thing that needs to be fought for is how do we get them off the street? How do we prevent them from moving around? Because I think and I think this is why it's like, you talked about kind of the tier level of like what it is that can, what it is that can be fought for. I think when that happens, and that's not to say again, like what we've opened up in this like space is that like principally if like a family deserves like what they deserve, if you want like to get compensation, if you experience like financial difficulty because of your loved one's murder, like that's exactly you deserve that, right? But I think there's something to be said about saying that like putting this, because what I've observed is that there's organizations that have a tendency of kind of like making this kind of like tiered list, right? It's like where they'll put like the getting killer cops off the street there. That's not really what that's not really how they're moving, right?
Just like with Alejandro's case.
Right.
Within 12 months, they killed 2 more people. Same police department. And I know they're the same cops that were out there with Alejandro. Killed them.
Yeah. And
So it's like, how do you stop that?
So I have some answers, like, because I feel like there's multiple questions, and before I forget how many to go through, I'd like to address them. So in regards to the tracking, the reason why I bring it up, and I can go right into detail, so in Cook County, if you look at Chicago, when they investigate things, if the officer leaves while they're under investigation, and they go to another department, Chicago just closes that investigation. They just stop investigating. They're like, he left, and they don't do anything about it. And then they go to this other department, where if they're in trouble there, then they can leave before it's ever fully investigated, and they keep moving around. Sometimes they're fired for cause. If they're not tracked, these other departments up until recently, because of new laws in Illinois under the Safety Act, they could just go in these other departments and have no idea what their history is. And this happens everywhere around the United States, where they leave under a cloud of suspicion, and then they just go somewhere else. One of the officers who, on the Dexter Reed case, went to Ohio. And if it wasn't for the media outing that officer, people in Ohio wouldn't know that officer was involved in Dexter Reed's shooting and murder. So the reason why I bring up tracking is because if we're not checking their backgrounds, then they are just going to these new departments with a clean slate, which is, the United States is very big. And if they're going there with a clean slate, then nobody's gonna know that these people should be being monitored. Like the officer who was just convicted in downstate Illinois was fired from multiple departments. The departments that hired them each time, they had no idea. So without knowing their history, which kept on getting worse and worse, we won't know that they are potentially a risk for shooting people and killing people because nobody's tracking it. In regards to your first question, yes, we are talking about civil suits because that is one of the means of going at it, because a prosecution isn't always something you can force. However, when you're talking to the civil rights attorney, if you get one, and you're saying your first priority is getting that person prosecuted, some of the things that they can work with you about is saying, making certain demands on the prosecutor, saying, while investigating this, I want you to investigate this like any other homicide. I don't want you investigating this any differently, under any other different procedures, like any other homicide. If it's a shooting, I want you inventorying that officer's gun the way that you would inventory any gun on a shooting that resulted in a homicide. You can say, you can ask the civil rights attorney to try to demand of the prosecutor still doesn't have to do it because it's in their purview, demand that they get a search warrant for the officer's social media. Get a search warrant for the officer's personal cell phone. The same way that me and Emily see prosecutors do that stuff all the time for our clients, we want you to investigate it the same way that you would do for any other citizen and not do it in a way that it has softer hands because it's a police officer involved shooting. Those are some of the things that could be demanded of the prosecutor, but it's always in the prosecutor's purview of whether or not they want to do those things or to bring an indictment, whether through a grand jury or preliminary hearings for a probable cause for a case to move forward. So that's why some of this conversation has been about civil suits, is because the fact is, usually you would have, if you have a civil rights attorney, then you'd have somebody advocating on your behalf to the prosecutor, opposed to going to the prosecutor yourself. They'd be like in between area, and as Emily said, because we're lawyers, people have to listen to us, even begrudgingly at times, even if even judges who roll their eyes at us and will try to stop us, still have to listen to us because there's a record being made. So it's just kind of a way to segue of using the civil rights attorney as your advocate to the prosecutor, even if the prosecutor doesn't want to do it themselves, but add some pressure.
I do think that in terms of getting officers charged, that's something that organization and people Dare to Struggle can be really and are really impactful for, because yes, an attorney can advocate with the prosecutors, but as we discussed earlier, prosecutors are elected officials. So if organization people are publicizing this particular officer's name, everyone knew, several years ago, Van Dyke's name because of Woodlawn McDonald, and he ended up getting charged. Now, that didn't really result in an outcome everyone was happy with, but I think that's because of the work largely that individual people did, publicizing, getting the names out there, not dropping it, showing up at 26th Street, making noise, making phone calls, posting on social media. That stuff really matters too, because if you're annoying and you're there all the time and you're not going to stop, people have to listen to you or walk around you or see you or hang up on you, and that, I do think that matters, especially when the prosecutor is an elected official and is the only person that can bring charges. But I think that that's definitely something to demand and not stop, and use the cops' names. Everyone should know this cop killed this person, this cop killed this person, and I know it's really hard when it seems like there's a new one, a new police murder by police all the time, and but yeah, I don't know, to not stop and not shut up about it is really important.
Yeah, so I wanted to, add some framing to if I can just,
I'm sorry.
not wrap up, but summarize what we've been talking about right now. Because I think that what you both just said is very important to how we are going to be building towards this mass movement. How important it is to have that clear path, right? So Mel was talking about the different ways that lawyers do use the legal system to pursue these criminal cases, to push for getting warrants for things, to push for making sure that these criminals are being pursued legally, and then from what Emily was talking to, how we pair those tactics and strategy with the mass movement. When we add that mass character and how lawyers are able to use these different tools to pair it with this mass character, that's how we're going to be able to advance the struggle to stop police brutality, with that being that end goal, right? So I know we did get stuck on what civil lawsuits can do, and how the way that the system approaches civil lawsuits takes that revolutionary energy out of this like mass movement, right? But there is something to say between tactics and strategy and how that can, when we're doing that with the mass character, when it is the people like in the streets taking up that fight, you know, these are things that we can pair together in order to like advance this struggle. With the end goal being ending police brutality, but this path needing to be that clear to us so that we're not putting all of our energy into the dead end reforms that do go nowhere. And then also that accepting anything less than jailing killer cops is not something that we can allow to happen anymore when those stakes are so high. So yeah, I wanted to add that, and then we can go back to.
Yeah, I think there were 3 people.
One.
Real quick, time check, we have less than 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, and then we can go to the back.
For me?
Yes.
Okay, so, when I listen to how the officers are allowed to, use qualified immunity, we've been trying to get it amended for a while because there's a term you can't just do away with, we have to amend it. As a mother who had no support while my son was shot and killed while sitting in a legally parked vehicle, he was shot in the head and in the back 5 times. His name is Deontay Bell. I'm from Ohio. In 3 years, officer records are sealed. So it doesn't matter if we have that database, if it's sealed within those 3 years, and you already know this officer is corrupt. Right now, today, there is a trial for Casey Goodson Jr. Casey Goodson Jr. was killed in 2020. What we here nationally should be doing, his trial is going to be for the next 3 weeks. Tamala Payne is his mother. She needs our support. We need to be more informed where we can come together collectively and do courtroom support so they can see us nationally in regards to him shooting this young man, 23 years old with no record, in the back 6 times while walking through the home. Thirdly, for me, I would like to see class action. We're doing civil alone. So if Procter & Gamble can be sued for powder that gives you cancer, this is something that's cancerous in our lives. It's eating us alive, and we're steady running into brick walls because in 1955, Emmett Till's mother fought to the death of her. So the things that we're sitting here discussing, and I am so privileged and honored to hear attorneys who are willing to take a different direction, because we're hitting a dead wall because the way the system is already is systematically, problematically, where we have to come together strategically to live. So I say all that to say, why haven't anyone, or why can't we do a class action suit that start affecting everyone little by little? Because that's how we're going to have to chip it. Because it starts at the top of the Supreme Justice system where there's no Oversight. at all, and they sit on the bench until they die. So how do you expect anything to change? You know, we keep singing change is going to come, and we keep on trying to invent the wheel that's already rolling, when again, it's something that's so already in our face in black and white and brown that the new avenue would be come together collectively and not just do class action. You know, I think that, not just do civil. Class action is something that they say has to be common. You know what's common? These kids getting shot in the back. You know what's common? They're running away. You know what's common? The police is getting off. So for me, my question is, how do we come together and find a way to do class action instead of just civil?
That's a great suggestion. I've never actually seen a class action like that, but it's a very great suggestion. I've only seen class actions when it's come to police brutality for wrongful convictions, like in Chicago for what they call the torture inquiry ones from back in the Verge era.
which is just horrible to call the Burge era because that guy was a piece of fucking shit and like the worst of the worst. And anyway, and I hope if there is a hell, he's in the third ring of hell, or the second or first, or in all pieces of them, in all of them. I would love to try to look into see if that's ever done. Since I'm a nerd, I probably will end up looking it up within the next couple of days to see if it's done anywhere in the country, just once again, I'm a nerd. In regards to the one thing you said that about databases, I am not just talking about government ones. I'm talking about ones that like, so you said in Ohio that 3 years, but if somebody like, I don't know the open records request in Ohio, but like if you FOIA things, then people could start creating databases. For instance, in Chicago, the Invisible Institute, which is a bunch of journalists, they have one called CPDP, where they've FOIA'd so much stuff and they just keep adding to it to be able to track police officers in Chicago. And I'm talking about a massive level one. I know that they've started one about past employment around the country, where the officers have been before from that. But I mean at a massive level, whether it's government, journalists, anything, that these officers just need to be tracked somehow, some way, preferably journalists and outside of the government, because government usually messes everything up, and I say that as a government employee. Do not repeat that to my bosses. But these are all great things that needs to be done, and I feel your frustration, and I will probably find you afterwards because I want to look up just for my own education about the trial that's going to be going on soon in Ohio. Because once again, there's
Started now, started yesterday.
So we're gonna wrap up because we're gonna be starting the next session. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have enough time for any more questions because we are going to be switching rooms. This room will go down the hall for the discussion on what happens when the cameras leave. That room is coming in this way. Yeah, now's the time to, yes, we'll have